Okay, so video number 3, the low section has already been installed in the case and nothing's changed. That's just mundane. You will use the low roller support installation tool, aka the abortion tool. Find them cheap on eBay. Here's your fixture. This is the Kentmore version. It's quite important. You can adjust the depth of the output shaft when you're putting it together. That's very important because your clutches need to be high enough so they all spline in onto the low planet. It will move, if you can see in there, yeah, barely, the park gear that the parking pawl rides on, and it's just an eyeball thing. You're going to move it around, you'll get it together, and then you may have to move it around when it comes to put that snap ring on the top, which I did. When you put the low support in, you want to make sure that this hole is lined up dead nut center that hole. You want to make sure these bad boys are free, which they are. There's retaining ring in the piston. You want to make sure it's in. And then once it's in, you want to make sure everything works. It works. So, now I'm going to take all the thrust out of the low section, which if you remember was 8 thousandths. And I'm going to set up the center section thrust before I do anything else. To set the center section thrust, I need to have the direct drum, which is going in the unit, which might be this one, and the forward drum is going in the unit. The forward drum has a thrust washer, which goes right here, which I will find that in a minute. This rides on that. And then there's going to be a tab washer, which goes right down here. Now, let's talk about forward drums and stock drums. Okay, when you take a forward drum and you make a billet, here's a billet drum. Here's the factory drum. What they do is some way, shape, or form, they cut out this whole shaft and they weld in a new shaft. A couple guys do it a couple different ways, and actually a couple guys have it done for them a couple different ways. But the problem is the height of the shaft. If it's not in the same place, it will screw up the thrust. It'll screw up the thrust on the thrust washer that rides here, and sometimes you can't get it right. It will also put these rings in a different spot, which is not crucial as long as they run in the center support where they're supposed to inside there and seal up. A simple air check will tell that. The other issue with these forward drums is wobble. Okay, it's kind of hard to show on a video, but when I take this drum and put it in the center support and I spin it, if I put something on here and I indicated it, you would see that this drum has got some wobble. There's a certain amount of wobble that GM built into these things just because they're not going to get it perfect, because it's a production car, it's not a race car. A lot of these drums come, I'm not going to mention any names because I'm not here to talk bad about anybody, they come with more wobble than the factory. Okay, so on top of that drum is a direct drum, which your band is applying against. So if he's not round, the whole thing is going to wobble a little bit. It's going to probably wear the bushings out in the center support. And I sure don't want this band to grab a drum with a, that's wobbling. I want my band to grab a drum that's running as true as possible. So that's why you got to be careful, and you have to check whose forward drums you get. Forward drums break when dual feeding, so it's absolutely mandatory for a billet forward drum then. A lot of guys run a billet drum just because, and it's not a bad idea. It's an expensive piece. Another option is you can run a hardened drum. I think Art Car still sells those if you're not dual feeding. But I don't think any builder, including myself, is going to warranty a forward drum if it breaks. That's just part of the business. So let me start setting up the thrust, and I will talk about that. Alright, so here's one of the toughest bushings to replace in this transmission, and I'm not going to lie, it kicks my butt every time. It's this thing. I really wish when they put these billet shafts in, they put the bushing in the right spot for you. But they send you a bushing and want you to screw it up. So first thing you got to do is you got to support the inside of the shaft. So I'm going to support it like so. It's just barely off the metal. Then I find the socket that fits in there that will grab most of that bushing. Sometimes this doesn't work. That's why I need to have more than one bushing on hand. So I'm going to set it up in a press.